So a few weeks ago, I was at Rapid TCT in California and was introduced to the folks over at Lethal Shadows, who have a new resin for your Resin 3D printers that looks absolutely amazing. This is their Shadow Essence Red resin, and your prints with this resin are supposed to be extra durable and they look amazing. But this resin is not for beginners, and that's even something that they have a warning of on their website. This is a rather difficult resin to work with, or at least to get the settings dialed in correctly for your prints. And that's exactly where we're gonna be testing out not only this resin, but also a new resin calibration test with the Elegoo Mars 5 Ultra that has that amazing testing functionality baked into it. And if you've watched any of my previous Resin 3D printing videos, you've probably seen me work with a file called the Cones of Calibration. That's gonna allow you to easily test your exposure settings and see if they're working or not based on the cones that are printing in that file. Well, the folks over at TableFlip Foundry that created the Cones of Calibration are working on a new version 3 file that I have early access to that I'm gonna be sharing with you all in today's video for testing and calibrating this new resin. So I have that Cones of Calibration version 3 file, and I'm gonna load it into Kaiju and set it up into equal individual spaces on that build volume of the printer. And this directly corresponds with the calibration function baked into the Elegoo Mars 5 Ultra, which is gonna allow you to create either 4, 6, or 8 calibration prints. And the recommended exposure settings are a bit higher than what I'm used to working with, so we're gonna start things off at 3.2 and work our way down to 2.2. And I am happy to see, after a quick less than 30-minute print, these turned out fantastic.
All right, so now that I've got the print a little bit cleaned up, I rinse this off in isopropyl alcohol and haven't removed them from the build plate because I want to really keep track of the values that I used for these and make sure that I'm using the correct ones based on the test results here. So what we're looking at in the front is the success side. So again, we're looking for all of the pillars on the bottom row there to be fully connected. So the ones in the front here, which is the lowest values there that I ended up printing with, were partially printed. So it's going to be that second row, which is going to be the higher print time or exposure time that I'm working with. And on the back side, we can also see that none of the cones were connected. That's the fail side. So that's actually properly the way that it should be. So if I look at this, what I'm really interested in is the value here in, it's this corner right here, which I believe is 2.8 seconds. Yeah, this one was 2.8, this one was 3 seconds, and this was 3.2 seconds. And then this one here in the bottom corner was 2.6, 2.4, and 2.2 seconds.
And we're gonna do something a little bit different when it comes to actually testing out these prints here, because I've got my little neck adapter here where I can mount my phone, and you should give you a first-person view of everything that I'm looking at. All right, so hopefully this works okay, but here we've got all of our different tests that we've run, and you'll see here I'm gonna be focusing on the 2.8 exposure test. And the reason why is this is the test that had the lowest exposure setting that I ran with, that had the completed cones attached here in the center on the success side, and then on the fail side, all of them failed correctly where they're not connected. And you'll notice here with this TableFlip Foundry new exposure test that they have, there's lots of other little tests that we can do with this. So the first thing that we're gonna do is pop off the little drink here, or the little, there we go, the little insert that goes into our cup here, and it should hopefully fit in there. There we go, perfectly. So it's not falling out, which is one of the tests. So if it was, if it easily slid in there, or if it didn't go in there at all, or if it's falling out when you turn it upside down. So this perfectly slid in place there. The next you'll see we have a skull, and then we've got a little opening here, and on the side is actually a sword that we can try to break free. So here's a little dagger sword. This is so cool. And we should be able to slide this directly in, and that goes all the way through. So that's perfect. And then the other two, let's see, there we go. The other two tests here, I believe this should, yeah, only partly go through in this one, and then it shouldn't go through at all on this one. So yeah, you see it didn't even bother going through the bottom opening. So that is actually perfect. That's exactly how the last two tests are designed. And here's just as a comparison, this is the 2.2 second, which is the lowest exposure test that I ran. And on the success side, I had none of the cones connected. You can see some of them look like they were going to, and then on the fail side, they all obviously did not print and connect, which is good. But on the success side, we were hoping to have some of those connected there. This is honestly such a cool, unique new way to test out your resins, and it's actually something semi-practical where it has supports that you can test out supports, and also just the exposure settings and see exactly how well parts are going to fit together. And now that we've got some calibration settings dialed in, let's start up our very first set of prints. This first print took 3 hours and 14 minutes, and if you didn't notice, yeah, it's missing the main print file there in the center. So clearly my exposure setting, even though we ran that test print, it was probably a little bit too low. So I'm now gonna go for the 3.0 exposure setting. That exposure update definitely worked, and most of the prints look really good. However, unfortunately, Lady Deadpool, her chin area, the supports did not properly adhere. So I'm gonna have to reprint this yet again and bump up that exposure setting slightly even higher. I also wanted to say a huge thank you to Elegoo for sponsoring today's video. They are the makers of this glorious Elegoo Mars 5 Ultra Resin 3D printer. This might honestly be one of the easiest Resin 3D printers that I have ever used. It makes it so straightforward and simple to get up and running with any resin and Resin 3D prints that you're interested in printing. Not only does the tilting vat on this printer allow it to print faster, but it also means that the setup process for you to get up and running is so much straightforward because you're only dealing with 2 or 3 settings versus dozens that you have with typical Resin 3D printers. And if you need something bigger than the Mars 5 Ultra, Elegoo also offers the Saturn 4 Ultra, which has that same tilting vat functionality. And if you're interested in more information about any of Elegoo's 3D printers, you'll find links to those down below. And after not 1, not 2, not 3, but on the 4th attempt, I was able to get this Lady Deadpool bust printed properly with this resin on the Mars 5 Ultra. And what I ended up doing was taking that original file that was pre-supported and add my own supports to it, and then taking a version of the file that had no supports and just adding them all myself with thicker contact points. And this resin is really thick and opaque, and honestly, I think I would have had a lot easier time printing with it if I had one of those Elegoo heater units directly inside the Mars 5 Ultra. Unfortunately, I don't have my hands on one of those yet. I hopefully will have one soon, and we'll be able to test that out and see how well it works. But I think having the resin warmer would have really helped out with the printing process. And now that I've got all of the prints cleaned up and cured, here's a better look at all of these and how well the detail shows with this Shadow Essence Red Resin from Lethal Shadows. I honestly think that these are some of the best looking Resin 3D prints that I have ever printed. The details out of the Mars 5 Ultra paired with this resin is so good. And I have a few different failed Lady Pool prints for me to work with here. I'm gonna leave this nice clean one here as is. I'm not gonna be dropping that one and trying to break it. I also have a few miniature files that I'm gonna be using for these drop tests as well. And just for comparison's sake, I had to go back and reprint some of these with one of my favorite resins. This is the Elegoo Rapid Resin. This is a really affordable resin and it is super easy to print with. However, it's not the most durable resin out there. But as you can see with the miniatures, I didn't have any issues with getting the details to print or the actual parts to print properly like I did with the other resin there. They also printed a good bit faster, coming in at about 30 to 40 minutes faster than this red resin. And to test out the durability of the resin, I don't do anything scientific like you might see on some other channels here. I do some very practical tests, like dropping them from a rather tall height. This is what you typically might find if you accidentally drop one of your 3D printed miniatures, and see exactly how this will fare from dropping it from about shoulder height here. So about, I don't know, 5 feet high. We're gonna start things off with our first Rapid Resin miniature. And one of the horns broke off. Now let's give this a little bit of a forceful toss. As expected, this time around, just completely exploded. And let's try it with the same file in the red resin. No damage whatsoever. Still nothing. And let's try a little bit more forceful. His arm snapped off with the shield as well as the sword, but the main body really retained itself. That's kind of impressive. It is kind of cool to see that there is still a bit of elasticity to the print even after curing it here with the cape. I really have to force it, there we go, for that cape to rip and tear. Next up, we have one of these Phantoms in the gray resin.
As expected, the hand and lantern area completely shattered with that initial drop. And after a little bit of a forceful drop there, the print split right in half. And let's do the same print, but in the red resin. Keep in mind the lantern already pre-broke off of this after I was removing it from the supports. Those basic drops really have almost no impact unless there's a really delicate area of your print with this red resin. Even after that, after a forceful toss, just part of the base broke off. The arm here, I can break off with a bit of force, but I'm not gonna be able to easily split this guy in half like that other gray print did. All right, now for the fun ones. Here is our gray lady pool. No major damage after dropping it with that initial drop there. Those swords were going to be the first thing that snapped off with even a bit of pressure with the drop there. All right, let's go for the first lady pool. This is one of the ones that had the screwed up chin. Funny enough, first attempt, one of the swords broke. Yeah, I think it's just all about the angle of how it's dropping, where it's going to smack the sword and break those in half. The bodies of both of these prints are pretty durable. Now for a little bit of a harder surface, let's smash them on the cement outside. Yeah, this just absolutely exploded once it hit the ground. And now let's try the red resin. That's honestly pretty impressive. It just has a scuff on the head, and then one of the swords broke on the back. No other major damage other than maybe a little shoulder damage there. Let's try it again. Still didn't break. Third attempt. After 3 tries, it finally exploded. I am definitely impressed with the results that I'm seeing of smashing this Lady Deadpool on the cement there outside. It took 3 attempts for me to be able to fully shatter this print. I'm assuming if it was fully solid as well, it would have held up even potentially better. Because it was hollow, it has more opportunity for it to break, but definitely held up better than the gray resin print. I will also have links down below to TableFlip Foundry's new exposure tester file that is currently in beta access over on their Discord. It will be officially released in the next month or so, and I enjoyed it so much that I decided to print it at 300% of the original size, which basically maxes out the build volume of the Elegoo Mars 5 Ultra. I also want to say thank you to all my Patreon supporters for your continued support and me making videos here on the interwebs. If you're interested in things like the Resin 3D printer settings that I used for this resin or my other Resin 3D printer settings, you'll find those over on my Patreon. And let me know in the comments what your favorite resin is, because I'm currently on the hunt for some new resin. Hey, I want to say thanks again for watching, you all, and I'll see you next time.